Happy New Year and welcome to this, which is the 6th episode of the podcast series called Russell Speirs and Friends, and it's all about thriving schools. And this is the first of the series for 2024. So I'm absolutely delighted that my friend today that I'm talking to today is Kai Vacher. Hello, Kai.
Hi there, Russell. Happy New Year.
I think we ought to come clean because we're not going to be able to keep up this pretense. We are actually recording this before Christmas. And as Kai and I consider ourselves fairly authentic people, I think we ought to come clean and say that we're actually doing this just a little bit before Christmas. You've just got, I think, 2 or 3 more days before you go off on Christmas holiday. Is that right, Kai?
That's right, yeah.
What will you be doing? Can I
heading off to the UK for only the second time in 12 years since I've been in Oman. Looking forward to the cold and the dark and the wet and all the Christmas lights.
Lovely. Yeah, well, we just put up ours yesterday, so it certainly lifts the spirits despite the cold weather. So Kai, thank you so much for joining me on this series. Now you're the principal of 2 schools. The British School of Muscat is probably the best known. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and the schools that you oversee?
Yep, I took up the role of principal of British School Muscat in Oman in 2019. We were invited by the Ministry of Education here to take on also the responsibility for British School Salalah, which is only 1,000 kilometres down the road from here. I have the privilege to lead both schools, and both schools actually are not-for-profit. They were set up in 1971 as not-for-profit schools for the expat community in Oman, which, as Sultan Qaboos came into power in 1970, he had a vision for the country, and he wanted to develop it rapidly, and he realised he would need expatriate support, professional workers to help develop the country, and therefore granted a royal charter to our school back in 1973. And since then, 50 years ago, we've been here in the Sultanate providing high quality British education to a diverse international community.
Yeah. And of course, I had the pleasure of visiting your school. I'm just thinking it's almost exactly a year ago, wasn't it?
It is, yeah. And
you showed me around, so thank you for that. Let's get straight down to the topic, to the brass tacks, or whatever the phrase is. This series, Kai, is about me meeting interesting and experienced educators like yourself and asking them what they think is the special sauce, the ingredient that they would highlight, perhaps, that helps a school to thrive. So what would be your suggestion that helps a school to thrive, Kai?
For me, it's very clear and was contained very also clearly in a McKinsey report of 2007, where McKinsey did a lot of research into 25 different international school systems. And I don't think anybody who's worked in schools for more than a couple of years would have been surprised by the concluding outcome of that research. When you're looking at the highest performing school systems in the world, and I would say also the highest performing schools in the world, the key point is the quality of any educational system or any school cannot exceed the quality of its teachers.
Okay. So teachers, the quality of teachers, that's your special sauce, as it were. That's the thing that you would prioritize if you're trying to help.
I think if you want to have a thriving school, the fundamental starting point is you need to have quality teaching staff who are also supported by highly qualified professional support staff too.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you go about that? How do you go about recruiting them? How do you go about retaining them? I mean, recruiting teachers these days is a bigger challenge than ever, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's an easy thing to say. We need quality teachers, but the real challenge, and again, I think this is probably the biggest strategic challenge for any school anywhere in the world, is that we have a global teacher supply crisis, and we've had it for quite a while. And in the corporate world, they talk about black swans when they think about strategic risks.
I've heard of black swans, but go on, because this is not
black swans are issues or events which happen like COVID out of the blue, and they cause horrendous amount of stress and pressure on organisations. So the teacher recruitment crisis is not a black swan. It's actually what in the corporate strategic world, I think they call it grey rhino. And a grey rhino is something that can see out there in the distance. And we know it's going to charge at us at some point, but we don't know when. But when it does charge at us, it's going to cause some damage. And I think the teacher recruitment crisis is a bit like a grey rhino. So we've known about it for a number of years. I mean, if you've been to a BSME or a COBIS conference over the last decade, like I have many times, we have these fantastic updates from ISC research, and they always give us wonderful information on how the international schools market is growing, and also what pressure then that's putting on teacher supply. So if you start off with the UK, where lots of British international schools get our teachers from, like we do, I mean, this year, I think we just saw a month ago that they were aiming to recruit just over 26,000 teachers for the teacher training courses for this year, and they've recruited just over 13,000.
Yeah.
So our biggest area of supply, like as a British international school, that supply source is under pressure.
Yeah. No, that hit the headlines. I mean, that was national news just 10 days ago. I mean, Oman is a beautiful country, and yours is a great school and a famous school as well. Thanks in part to you, of course. But is it still a challenge you have to address? I mean, what are you doing to address this at the British School of Muscat specifically?
Yeah, so if we take those UK figures, that's an issue for us. And then if you think of British School Muscat, we're part of the international school sector.
Yeah.
And in the last 5 years, there have been nearly 1,500 additional international schools added into that market, and about 85,000 additional teachers recruited. And over the last 10 years, about 250,000 additional teachers recruited. So there's been huge pressure on the international school teacher supply market, if you like. And then if you look ahead to 2030, just the international schools market alone is going to have to recruit another over 500,000 teachers. So however good a school you might be, even in the international sector, this teacher supply challenge is a really big strategic issue, and it's a strategic threat if you want to have a thriving school, because you need these quality teachers. So when I shared this data, or data like that, with my board probably 7 or 8 years ago, they very clearly could recognize this grey rhino which was charging towards us. And like all good boards, they said, well, Kai, we need a 3-year strategy to deal with this. And so that's what we did. So starting in 2014, we put in place our first 3-year employment strategy.
Okay, so what does that cover?
Can't disclose everything, which is commercially sensitive, but the 3-year strategy is just about to start and put in place our third 3-year employment strategy. Okay. So what does it look like? Well, basically it's got 3 components. The first one is about how competitive are our pay and benefits, and that's a starting point. So we do a lot of benchmarking with local schools, other schools in the region, globally, to make sure that our pay and benefits package is as competitive as possible. Second component is CPD and training. So if you go back, I don't know, a decade maybe or more, international schools used to be seen as graveyards of opportunity. And I was very keen when I took up the role here at British School Muscat in 2011, that we would need to put in place programs, opportunities, events for staff to grow and develop. So the second point is CPD. And then the third element of the strategy is staff wellbeing.
Okay, because now, I mean, my impression, and I'm sure you've played a significant role in this, is that CPD is much more important in international schools generally, and it's one of the ways that international schools try to attract staff is by emphasizing good CPD. But let's talk about that third element then, the well-being of staff, because it's important. It's also very much of the moment, isn't it? I think we've just published a report which I know you're planning to read, I believe, over Christmas.
Absolutely.
Which talks about the importance of the well-being of the head, the principal. So what do you do to try to protect and develop the well-being of your teaching staff and your support staff?
Yeah, so I think we have to focus on what, as schools and school leaders, we can influence in terms of creating an environment where we can all manage our well-being and take responsibility for our well-being in a way that helps us to thrive as professionals within the school. So the first thing is really basics, but it is really important that we believe we should be offering our staff, our expatriate staff, the best healthcare that is available. And we did a lot of research into this 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of research into the market. And since we've then moved to the provider we are now working with, I've not heard any complaints at all from staff. Actually, I've heard lots of positive feedback, how easy it is to get access to healthcare. So that's sometimes overlooked in this debate, but having access to healthcare, I've got my GP on WhatsApp. So that's very different, I think, to what you might be experiencing in some parts of the UK at the moment. So we've got very accessible, high quality healthcare that's available to all our expatriate staff who can't access the local health facilities, which the local staff can. Then the second piece is, I remember working with a deputy head of my first school, 25, 30 years ago, and we were probably grumbling in November about how tired and exhausted we are. And he said, Kai, the problem with teaching is teachers just teach too much. And this was well before the sort of 10% minimum PPA came in state schools in the UK. And that has stuck.
Planning, preparation and assessment.
That's right, yeah. So the time, planning, preparation and assessment, PPA. So quite a few years ago in state schools in England, there was a statutory sort of 10% was put in as a minimum. Which if you've ever been a teacher, you'll know that 10% PPA is not a huge amount, but at least it's set a sort of a standard. That idea that teachers teach too much, that's really stuck with me since I had those conversations many years ago. And so what we did as part of our first 3-year strategy some years ago is we wanted to make sure that all our teachers, wherever possible, had at least 20% PPA.
Okay.
And so now we've got that. So still, if you're teaching with a huge amount of energy and passion and care, which our staff do, that's still quite demanding, but it still puts us at a competitive advantage, like to the English state system. With my conversations with other head teachers in the region, I sense that if now, as a leading international school, you're not offering at least 20% PPA for your teaching staff, you're not competitive in that territory. That's an important point for our teachers. So we've got healthcare, we've got PPA. Then I think you go into maybe less tangible but very important things. And so the third piece is around communication. And I'm absolutely fascinated by the art and the science of communication. And I know this is something that you're very interested in too. And it seems we can never pay enough attention to the quality and the timing and the thought that goes behind how we communicate with our colleagues, particularly about changes or things like that. So I think really giving that a lot of thought every day about what we've made this decision, who do we need to inform, how are we going to inform them? And so proactive, carefully worded, empathetic, compassionate communication, I think that's really important in helping staff feel that they are valued and they're respected and they're inspired to do their work each day.
That's difficult though, isn't it? Because you want to devolve that down into different sort of parts of the school so that the head of department can communicate well, and a head of year or a head of section, you can't be sitting there checking everything and you can't check every conversation. How do you get that right? I mean, how do you get that right across an organization where you're trying to empower as many people as possible to communicate with their teams or with their own stakeholders? Well, I think it's important that we live into our values. So we talk about excellence and innovation. When we talk about communication, we can always ask the question ourselves, is that excellent, the way we're communicating that? But also 2 of our values are courage and kindness. And I think when we're communicating, we need to think about
the way we're communicating, is that a kind way of doing it? And is it clear? And I really like this quote, being clear is kind. And so really thinking how the clarity of your communication lands on somebody, that's a very kind thing to do. So unclear communication is not kind. Using our principles to our communication, is it kind? Is it excellent? And the other thing, is it courageous? And this is probably more about conversations that we need to have with each other from time to time. There are conversations we need to have with colleagues, but we don't always have them, maybe because we haven't got the courage to have those conversations.
Absolutely, it's difficult. I mean, I did one of our values in talking to candidates, clients, and each other bravely and politely, similar to what you're saying. We don't have much time left, Kai. There is one other thing that we could just mention briefly, and maybe we could come back to another time in the future, and that's about coaching and having a coaching culture. Could you just say just a little bit about that? But could you just give us a bit of an overview?
A lot of those elements in the employment strategy about recruitment and attracting, recruiting, and developing people. But there's also a retention piece. People don't leave organizations, they leave bad bosses or they leave bad leaders. Teaching is all about relationships. I think it is. Relationships are really important in the classroom and around any organization. How much training have any of us had in actually developing and nurturing effective relationships? Yeah. So this is where the coaching culture piece comes in. That's a really important step forward. There's another dimension to coaching, which is team coaching or relationship coaching amongst teams. We've started thinking about how we can help teams work more effectively together. And that's a piece of work I'm really excited about. So I think it has so much potential to create an even better school. And I'd love to talk to you about that perhaps another time, Russell.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that, Kai. I always learn so much from you, and thank you very much. And thank you on behalf of the sector, because you're leading the way in so many areas, and you share that with your own podcast and your own posts, and you're a real inspiration, genuinely. Thank you very much. And I'm not sure whether I should wish you happy Christmas or a happy 2024, but either way, I wish you all the very best. And I look forward to the next conversation that we have.
And same to you, Russell. And thank you for all you are doing and your organisation to support us in the sector. There's some fantastic publications that you brought out in recent years, and those provoke conversations all over the world. You and your colleagues, you're doing fantastic work when we feel very supported by you.
Thank you.
Take care.